Welcome everyone. This is Automated Desktop Application Testing with Ranorex. I'm Josh Owen. I'll be moderating today and also answering any Q&A that comes through. Today we've got a quick overview of Ranorex, then we'll go through a test automation demonstration, and we'll have a little time at the end for Q&A. You can always email us at theevaluation@ranorex.com. Quick housekeeping steps here. Usually on the top right, there's a Q&A panel. Please use that to ask any questions within the webinar as we go through, and I'll also try and address some there at the end. This webinar is being recorded, so a few hours or so after this has completed, you'll get an email with the link to that recording. Ranorex Studio covers 400 plus technologies. We automate desktop, web, and mobile technologies. Object recognition is our specialty as well. If you can't reliably access these objects, then your actions aren't very helpful. Today, we're going to look at Ranorex Studio, looking at the recording features, the ease of use. And Ranorex also integrates into many of your continuous integration systems like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, Bamboo. We also integrate with test management systems as well. So as we move through our demonstration here, I'll introduce Mubin, and Mubin will continue with our demonstration. Here we go, Mubin.
Hello, and welcome again. My name is Mubin. I have been with Ranorex for a little over 5 years, and whenever I do a demonstration like this, I like to think of it as an open conversation. Now, in this case, it's one directional, but feel free to use our Q&A panel, and my colleagues will be happy to answer your questions. Now, before we begin, we'll just quickly go over our landing page. This is the Ranorex landing page. On the bottom left panel, Sample Solutions, we have a variety of samples, desktop, web, mobile, and it's a good in-depth study of what a mid-sized test would look like. Definitely open those up, these tests, play around, make changes, see if you can optimize them. But if you ever make a break or break something in the test, not to worry. The next time you open up Ranorex, it'll be a clean slate. Also, we have a nice collection of videos in our library. They're about 2, 3, 4 minute long videos highlighting many of the features in Ranorex. This way you don't have to scroll, say 25, 35 minutes into this demo, trying to remember what it is I talked about. You could probably quickly find it here. Our center panel here is just our blog, our automation space blog. It's not Ranorex specifically, but just what's happening in the world of automation. Let's go ahead and start a new solution via Wizard. So I'll click that. Okay, I'm going to do a desktop presentation webinar. So I'll click desktop. However, we're not limited to having one technology per recording. We can actually create a recording targeting all 3 technologies. And what Ranorex will do is just cycle through the application, the technology, bring it to the forefront to do the actions, bring the next one to the forefront. So you're not limited in just targeting one technology. We'll give it a name, we'll call it webinar. And it saves by default to your documents folder. You can always change it if you'd like to present it elsewhere. Under additional options, the project name inherits your solution name, but you can have multiple projects under one solution. Since this is my desktop demonstration, I'll call it desktop. I could have a web project later if I like. And Ranorex itself is a 100% codeless UI functional test tool. You don't have to have knowledge of coding, any experience. It's 100%. You do the actions, Ranorex will write the code behind the scenes and present that in a graphical format. Ranorex does write in C# or VB.NET. So if you do have testers who would like to extend this test in code, we do provide access. A good example is when filling out a form. Let's say you click the Add button. Once you click it, that information gets sent to a SQL database on your server somewhere. Your next action after the add button could be a code action that queries the SQL database and validate did the file or the information get added to the table. So in a sense, you're doing front-end testing and then back-end testing. It's not just a front-end test tool. You can also, through code, test back-end servers. Click Continue. My process is not running on my operating system currently, so let me go ahead and browse for my application. Okay, there it is. So we'll do the demo app. If your app requires you to provide some arguments before you start it up, go ahead and list those arguments here. I'm going to put it on the whitelist so that Ranorex only talks to this process and no other processes running on my operating system like Outlook, File Explorer, or anything else that might be running. And finish. Okay. What's going to happen now is Ranorex will open up my application under test, this right here, this demo app. And behind it is the Ranorex IDE, its development environment where we'll do our work. There are two main screens that you'll do a majority of your work. The first screen, our webinar desktop test suite. By default, using the wizard, it created a test case for us, and it created a start application recording, a close application recording, and we have to fill in the missing pieces in the recording one. So in the test suite is where you'll manage your test cases. You'll build test cases, manage them, group regression type test, group smoke type test, unit testing. So this is where development of test cases will occur. The recording itself happens in the recording view. So to get to it, if the tab is not available, just double click it. It takes it to the recording panel. Here there are two views. The top view is the action table. And here you'll see actions like button clicks, typing into text boxes. Those are all actions that are local to this recording. The panel below this is the repository. And this is a collection of objects you do actions on, like an OK button is an object you click. A first name text box is an object you click and then you type into. These objects will be global to all recordings. So all recordings will have access to objects you interact with. Okay. The two panels to the left, the upper panel is the Project Explorer. There's not really much to talk about here. This is just all the artifacts of the project itself, class files, repositories, databases if you have them. That's what you'll find up here. The panel below that is a simplified view of this. We're only looking at the recordings right here. And you can see we have 3 recordings right now. Going back to the test suite, we're using these 3 recordings in this test case. When we start this demonstration, I'm going to start with a simple test, start to finish, create a project. I'm going to then extend that by breaking it up into modules so that these modules will be repeatable or reusable. And what I mean by that is, let's say your application has a login screen and you have to do 4 or 5 actions, interact with it to get to the next screen. If you have hundreds of test cases, you could write these 4 or 5 actions for every test case. But now if the developers come back and they add a new button that you need to interact with, you'll have to go back and fix hundreds of test cases. It's better if you have one recording called login for just those 4 or 5 steps. That login recording can then be shared or referenced in all your other test cases. This way, when a developer makes a change, you don't have to make a change in every test case. Just update this recording. Everywhere it's referenced will reflect those updates, those changes. Okay, if you have any questions on the ID itself, by all means, feel free to ask those in our Q&A panel, and my colleagues will be happy to answer those. Let's go ahead and start our recording. Click the record button, and what you'll see is this dot that follows my mouse. It's a red dot here because this application is on the whitelist. If I go off the whitelist, I'm not able to detect any other objects. This red bounding box is Ranorex identifying objects on your application. So it's just telling you everything it's able to identify. I'm going to click on this test database tab, first name. Okay. When I click on the object, you'll see an hourglass for a half a second or so. That's the amount of time it's taking Ranorex to take that action and write it to the action table. There you go. And you'll also notice that in the bottom right is our Ranorex recorder. It will always show the last 4 actions created. It'll keep a history, but it will present the last 4. Here, this is a mouse action, left mouse button, click event, and I can look at what that was. Oh, yeah. I click my first name, type first name, perfect. So far, so good. Now, if you happen to continue with the test and you're not paying attention, or you accidentally do something you didn't mean to do, like click this tab, and I realized, I'm not recording this right now. I want to go back to the test database. Well, this was an accidental action. The recorder allows you to do real-time editing. You can say, okay, I did that. This was an error. I didn't mean to do that. Let me go ahead and delete it. Okay. However, if I go back and click this, I've already clicked it once. I'm just going to add it again to the action table. I can pause it at this point, get my test back to where it should be, continue, and begin recording again. Okay. I'll go ahead and select a department. Let me go ahead and provide an age, a gender, and add entry. Okay. What I want to do at this point is I want to validate that one person was added to the table. So I'm going to validate this label that it says 1. So let's go to the recorder. Right now we're in recording mode, the red banner. Click validate. Red goes to purple. So does the bounding box. And we're going to select it. What pops up now is our validation wizard. This first screen is more informational. Once you understand it, you can just click next. But as you can see, this is the process that we're running, the application. And this is an interactive screen. You can zoom in, move it around, and say, oh, what was the path to this object again? And Ranorex will show you the path from the form, the object tree, to the object we're interested in. Once we have this object, there is a list of attributes that belong to it. And all of this we can validate if we like. But I'm interested in text, that it says 1. That's what I want to validate. Behind the scenes, we have access to these values as well, but Ranorex will look at this screen rectangle attribute and ask the application, where are you located on the screen? And that's where it'll move the mouse. Now, if I take this application and say I move it over here, it opens over here next time. The next time Ranorex does the action, it'll go to the object, it'll look at its value and say, oh, it looks like your new position is right here. That's where I'm going to move the mouse. Or if you record on your center screen, but you want to play back on your left monitor, again, Ranorex will always ask the object before it does the action, where are you located? And that's where it'll move the mouse. The purpose of this is to let you know that you can record on a high resolution screen and play back on lower resolution monitors without having to worry about XY coordinates, image capturing. That's not what Ranorex is doing. It's pure object recognition. Find the object, find out where it's located, and then move the mouse there. This is a topic I could talk about for 2 or 3 hours, but definitely, hopefully, if it gives you some confidence on how Ranorex works with object recognition. And again, if you have any questions, by all means, ask my colleagues. They'll be happy to answer. Let's go ahead and click next. Okay. Ranorex always checks to see if the object exists. In this case, we want to validate text. It has it checked. But if it doesn't have it checked, go ahead and check it yourself or check any other values you're interested in. Click OK. And now we are out of validation and we're back into recording mode. I'm going to click delete entry and then exit. But remember, using the wizard, Ranorex opened the application for me and closed the application. So I don't really need to exit. I can just stop my test. Okay. What we have here now, let me close this output panel, get more real estate. We have our actions here at the top. This is the first action, mouse action, click event, left mouse button, and this is the XY coordinates of where the mouse clicked inside the object. So the object is 0, 0. Once we find the bounding box, 0, 0 begins here at the upper left. 40 pixels over, 8 pixels down, that's where we clicked. Okay, and this is the repository object that we're targeting. And you can see it's highlighted in the repository panel. We click the first name field, typed in first name, click the last name field. It's always highlighting that object associated with this action. We opened the subpanel, we clicked on a submenu, clicked on age, typed age. Now here I use the numpad, but you can edit this field. Just click on it and type 35. That'll work as well. Click gender, clicked add, and validated. Now validation is it's just textual. If it passes, you'll just see a green in the report that it passed, and we'll continue with the test. But you may want to do visual inspection also. You may want to say, I'd like to capture this object and report it and have it get reported with a screenshot. You can do that by selecting the object here in the repository that matches that action. With the left mouse button, click and hold and drag it. You can drag it anywhere, but I'll put it after the validate and say capture screenshot. If I want, I can capture a screenshot of the page itself and see who was added. So let's do that as well. Click, grab, and hold with the left mouse button and capture screenshot. Okay, and there we go. We have a complete test from start to finish. Let's go ahead and run this test and see how it plays back. So I'll go ahead and close my application and run. It's going to open the application, do those actions we just created, and close. Whenever Ranorex builds a test, it actually builds an executable file. So it's this executable that's actually running the test. I don't have to have Ranorex open behind the scenes. Also, you don't have to have Ranorex installed on every target machine as well. Okay, perfect. And there we have it. A completed test. It did pass. Let's go ahead and expand details. And we can see that we did the start AUT actions, opening the application. We did the recording one actions where validation passed. We took a screenshot. You see I got added to it, as well as just a screenshot of the label as well. And we closed the test. Now that we have this, let's extend it now by creating modules, reusable modules. I'm going to take the first action because I might have these other tabs. I want them as separate modules in case I want to do unit testing or just a tab order. So I'm going to right click and say move to new recording module. We'll call it database tab. So how about tab database? Okay, I have a new recording called tab database of just that one action. Okay, my next set of actions will be everything from 1 through 10. This is all the actions required to add a user. I select it using a shift key, right click, move to new recording module, and we'll just call it add users or add user. Okay, here's those 10 actions in my new module. Go back to recording one, validate. Some test cases I may want to validate, others I may not want to. Okay, we'll go back to recording one, we'll pull out screenshots. Okay, finally we have one recording left, or one action left. We can pull it out if we'd like, or just rename this module recording one here in the module browser. Just go ahead and select it, click it to get to the editor, and just type, we'll call it delete button. Okay, now that I have all my recordings created, the rest of my work is going to be done in the test suite. So go ahead and save everything. If you don't like the clutter of all these extra tabs, just right click, close all but this. And I'm going to create a couple of test cases. From the test suite, click add a new test case. We'll call it we'll do a smoke test today. If you'd like, you can also use the mouse by right clicking, add new test case. We'll do a simple test. And we'll do one more test. We'll call it users or add users. Okay, so the simple test is exactly like what we just did. We're going to take these modules and rebuild my test. So we start with the AUT, where click, hold, and drag. We want to move to the tab. We want to add user. We want to do validation, screenshots. Now when we put it here, they go to the bottom, but you can put it anywhere if you'd like. I could do screenshots before validation and maybe screenshots after validation. Clear or close, or not close. I want to delete, where, yeah, there it is. And then close. Okay, so there you have it. I have one complete test case from start to finish. Now the purpose of this is, let's say by breaking up into these modules, let's say my validation step, I have 100 validation steps, and when I run this, it might take an hour to run from start to finish. If the developers come back and maybe they make a change to the application, I run this, it might break, say like 30 minutes into it, but that's 30 minutes of downtime. It might have been smarter had I known that there was updates to this application to maybe do a smoke test instead. The smoke test might only take 52 seconds to run, and if it breaks, it might break in say like 25 seconds. That would be a 30-minute savings for me to not have to sit there and wait and spend my time going back and rebuilding. So let's create that smoke test. We're going to start the AUT, go to the tab. Where's the tab? There it is. Okay, we're going to add the user. We don't need to validate. We don't need to do any screenshots. We're just going to delete and close. So now I was able to recreate another test case without having to rebuild, re-record, do any extra work. Now, naturally, not all of your recordings will be reusable. You'll have custom recordings as well. So to create a new recording, just click the movie icon. Let's call this one reset. Maybe in my larger test cases, I have to reset databases or do something to clear out some information before I start playing back. I'll leave this empty. I really don't need it. But let's say this one requires a reset before I actually start, but I don't need to do any resets here. So this is modularization. This is the importance of building your test modularly. Just try to find steps that are repeatable, that can be used in other test cases, and pull them out as a module. Now that I have this, if I wanted to, I guess what we'll do now is we'll move forward and introduce a data source and show how data can drive the direction of the test. To add data, or I would say before I add data, the number of iterations will be based on the rows in the data. So if my data source has 5 rows, 50 rows, or 500 rows, that's how many times this test would iterate. Now, if the data source had 50 rows, on the first row, it would run all of these actions. An hour later, run another set of actions, and it will rinse and repeat 50 times. That's 50 hours. That's a lot of time. Computers are happy working 5 seconds, 5 hours, or 5 days for us. That's not a problem. I probably wouldn't want to work 5 straight days opening and closing an application to add a person. It might be smarter to create a test that reflects what a real world user would do. They wouldn't open and close an application for each entry. They would open it once, add everyone, and then close it. And that's what we're going to do next. But I guess before we venture on into data driving, are there any questions regarding the modularization of Ranorex, how to use these modules, or any other questions? If there are, again, feel free. Colleagues are more than happy to answer those. So at this point, I want to create a new test, add user, where I reflect a real world user. I'm going to reset because my application needs to be reset. I'm going to open it. I'm having trouble with my mouse here. And I'm going to open the tab. Okay. At this point, I want to begin the loop. So let me add a new folder by right-clicking, add new smart folder. I'll call it users. And I'm going to add my users at this point. My database will be here. I'm going to validate. I'll do screenshots, but I don't need to take a screenshot of every user. I'll go ahead and take a screenshot of the entire database once it's been added. Then I'll go ahead and clear everything. Clear, if you see it anywhere, just raise your hands. Delete. Okay, and close. Okay, so I'm opening my application, going to the Start Database tab. My database will reside here, and I'll loop through all the rows. Once I finish, I'll exit out, continue with the rest of the recordings until I finish. So what we need to do before we add the database is we need to create some variables. And I'm going to do that in my Add User recording. So let me double click to open it. Some obvious places, my name. So click the drop down, as new variable. We'll call it first name with the default value. Leave my default value in there. Now, if you have a lot of values to click on and you don't want to hunt and peck through all these rows, go ahead and click the variables button. Add variable. Last name. I'll keep it short for purposes of this demonstration. We'll say age, 35. Say gender, male, and then finally category or department. And I'll say testing. Okay. When I'm not using a database, it will fall back to these default values. So you'll still be able to continue with playing your tests back if you're not connected to a database. Okay. Last name. Oh, perfect. There it is. Age. Perfect. There it is. Gender. Okay. So how do I get to this female object? Now, there's one of two ways to do it. One is we can right click. We can convert this into a user code and then simply write a condition statement. If the database says female, click the female object and we'll have to track this object and have it in our repository. If male, click the male object. That's an easy way to do it. But if you remember at the beginning, I mentioned Ranorex was a 100% codeless automation tool. We should have Ranorex make that decision for us. And we can do that by looking at its object here in the repository. So we're going to click Edit and Spy and see how we can make this work for us. Okay, so the Spy tool opened up on my other monitor. Now everything is red. This is not nothing to be alarmed about. It's just saying that your application is not on the desktop. So let me go ahead and open it up to the page that we're interested in and refresh. Okay, it's all green. Let's go ahead and highlight it to see what we're able to discover. Okay, so it did find this object that we're interested in. Now, Ranorex creates a path to this object starting here at the parent. If you go to browser results, we can see the full path to this object. It's fairly simple, 3 paths. Starting at the parent, Ranorex puts in wildcards, whether they're question marks, and this is saying in the future there may be 1 or 2 more relatives to this object, and what that means is it uses a smart algorithm to understand how developers might make changes in your application and puts in wildcards saying that in the future they may put this object in a container, which is another layer. So there may be 2 more layers in the future. Check all of them until you find this child. And again, the same thing for the radio button. You may also see // It's just saying that in the future, we don't know how many layers there might be. Check them all until you find radio button. This is often the case for web. You'll see that wildcard. Now from this point backward, you don't have to worry about anything. That's everything Ranorex takes behind the scenes. All we're interested in is the actual leaf, the last object on the branch. Here's the branch. This is the object, or the last element on the tree, and this is what it looks like. So this is what we're interested in. And remember, these are all the attributes that belong to this object. And text is important because my database will say male. It won't say RBD male, so let's keep that in mind. We're going to go to the path editor. We're going to select the last element on the tree, the radio button object. And here we're going to change and say, let's use the text attribute. So I'm going to click it and it added text up here and not control name. Perfect. Now, if you want, we can refresh it and see if it still finds the object. Okay, my refreshing doesn't seem to be working, but it's searching for the element now. Okay, it still found it with my change to the path. All we have to do now is just parameterize this with the dropdown, gender, and now whether this is male or female coming from the database will determine where this is coming from. Actually, before I parameterize, let me go ahead and just type female in there. Okay, hit enter. Another way to refresh. Okay, it's green. Let's go ahead and highlight it. And there we go. We've now targeted the female object. We can get to both of those based on the database value. So we'll parameterize this and apply. Okay, perfect. And then finally, we can do the same thing for testing as well. We can get to any one of these other submenu items. Again, you can click Edit and Spy, or if you get familiar or comfortable with it, you can just click inside and edit it directly. Take out the word testing, replace it with a $sign for variable, and category. Okay, now that I have all my variables in place, let's go back to my test suite. I'm going to save everything. You'll see I have unbound variables in all these recordings. If I click run, we'll fall back on the default values. At this point, we're going to bind them to a database here. So select users, go to data source. We can do a simple data table inside Ranorex Studio directly here on this panel, or connect to a comma separated file, an Excel file, or a SQL database. I'll do Excel today. Okay, you can call it whatever you'd like, users. Go ahead and search for it. Desktop, database, and it's going to be my desktop. Okay, once the database loads, if you have some sensitive information, whether it's social security numbers or age or something you don't want others to see in the report, click the apply button, and that will allow you to mask it out now. So we're going to mask out last name. Okay, click OK. And now the database will load on this table. Mine only has 5 rows, but your database may have 500 rows. And if you're just in the process of creating this test, you may not want to go through all 500 rows. You may only be interested in rows, maybe a couple of rows, just to see how it works. You can set a range down here, and I'll set it for, say, rows 2 and 3. So I'm going to target rows 2 and 3. Female, marketing, and management are 3 objects that weren't part of our original test, but the data will now drive the direction to these objects. You'll notice my column headers are the same as my variable names, and there's a reason behind that. So let's go ahead and bind the data source to the variables now. We can do that by clicking Data Binding, go to First Name column, click Unbound, select it, first name makes it easy to find. But if they're named the same, click Auto Bind, and you'll let Ranorex do the work for you. Click Apply, OK. And now you have a database of 5 rows, filtered out rows on 2 and 3, and it is bound. All 5 variables are bound. Let's go ahead and run this test, but I guess before I run this test, let's uncheck these so I don't run all the others. Let's take a look at report properties so that at the end, we'll take a look at the report. Right-click on Test Suite, go to Properties. I guess before I show the reports, if there's any questions on the database, Again, remember, it's an open conversation, so I always ask if there are any questions to the audience. Feel free to ask in our Q&A panel. Click on Properties. Go to Reports tab. Now this, the report saves in a reports folder where the executable files is located, but you can always change it to wherever you like to keep the reports. By default, they use a timestamp as the file name, but you can always change that. But more importantly, it doesn't have to be an RX log file. If you have other people who need to view this report who don't have an RX viewer available, just change it to HTML and it will open up in a browser. You can also change it to a PDF file. That's done a little differently. And if you want, if you run these tests after hours, you can have Ranorex email you the reports the next morning. A nice feature, in addition to having your report emailed, is that we also record every test case. You may be running 50 test cases in the next evening, and you just want a recording of the ones that fail. That way you can go back and look, watch the video of it and how it failed, why it failed. But this also opens up a communication bridge with your developers. You can go to them and say, listen, I have a video here, and this is where the test keeps failing over and over again. Have a look and see, what you think is happening, or why you hadn't seen it happen when you were building the test. Or if you want, record all test cases. Give me a link to every test case, and I'll just at my leisure go back and do a review of them. Click Apply. Okay. Now I'm going to run this test, but before I run it, just two quick things. Inside validation, I did not parameterize this, so on the second one, this validation will fail. And when validation fails, the test will fail and it'll just generate a report at the point of failure. But for me, validation is not a critical step. I may have 100 steps, and if validation is step 35 and it fails, well, that's the end of the test. I would like it if I could continue with the rest of my tests, because my last 5 might be validating a different part of my test, and those might pass. So it'd be nice to let the test finish to see which validation points pass, which fail. To do that, just right-click on a validation or really any action, and you can just say enable, continue on fail. Okay, but in this case, I'm just going to disable it. You also have the option to disable actions. You may create your test cases and might have many different ways of doing what you're trying to create. So you can always go back and disable actions and say whether you need them or not. You'll decide after you're finally done, but you just don't want to use them. Go ahead and disable actions. You can also disable recordings as well. Maybe I want to run this entire recording, but I don't want to close the browser because I want to see what it looks like after the end. So let me go ahead and disable it. Okay. At this point, I'll run the test. Let me close everything down. And remember, I can put this anywhere. It can open up anywhere. Ranorex will still be able to identify where the object is on the screen. Click Run. It's going to build an executable file again. And it's that executable file that's actually running the test, not Ranorex Studio. Okay. Now, the first action always takes a little longer because it has to read the entire object tree into memory. But once it has it, it goes fairly quickly. Okay, so Wonder Woman is in marketing. Okay, so we added Wonder Woman and now Batman. He's in management. Makes sense. He's a billionaire, would make sense. Okay, fantastic. Delete and exit. It'll close it automatically. We don't have to exit. Oh, actually, I disabled it so it won't exit. Perfect. So we did, again, the test passed. Let's go ahead and expand details. You can see that add user, we only did once, these actions here. And here's the link to the video. I'll click on it. We don't have to watch the video, but you can see that there is a video. You can always play back to see how the test performed. This is the user folder that we ran twice. The test data for the first row or the second row in this case, we masked out. Then the test data for the second row or the third row that we have marked here. And then finally, we exited the loop. We took a screenshot of the individuals that were added and of the label itself. And then finally, delete, but we did not close the application. And it is HTML. Okay, so that's the end of the demonstration. Again, we're happy to stay on longer. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Mubin, for that excellent demo. In conclusion here, wrapping up a few points, Mubin showed us how we can use recording and drag and drop to create simple actions and test cases. Those actions are stored in our reusable modules so you can quickly build out those test cases as you extend your testing. We also got to see data-driven testing, where we provided some data and used that in place of our hard-coded values. Finally, Ranorex does support many different technologies. So we looked at desktop today, but definitely give us a try for web and mobile as well. Please reach out to us at evaluation@ranorex.com. You can also download your free trial on our website. So definitely check this out, get your hands on the tool if you haven't already, and we're happy to help. Finally, we'll go ahead and go into some Q&A here. Your properties of a text box, background colors, absolutely, you can validate those as well. Use your SPY tool, look for the background color attribute, and you can see that on the right side of your SPY tool. The minimizing here of running these things on a VM, we do need an active Windows session. So Ranorex is not executing in a headless fashion. You definitely need that UI. We are trying to mimic a user doing the clicks and keystrokes. Let's see what else we have in here. We do support multi-browser testing. I don't think you should have any problem with that. Just make sure you have your plugins installed. That should happen automatically as you go to run or record tests in a particular browser. For data-driven testing, we can get data from SQL Server or Oracle or any other database that would be able to use an ODBC connection. Let's see what else we have here. So many coming in. If I don't be able to pick out one of your questions today live, then please feel free to email evaluation@ranorex.com. I'll just mention that again. I'll put that email up here on the screen while I'm looking through some questions. So cross-application testing, yes, recording between desktop, web, and mobile, we can switch between those. We can switch between browsers. That is a good suggestion on an upcoming webinar. We'll take a note of that. Here's a question about sharing the object repository with a team. Definitely recommend using source control for that. This is a development project. Even though we're doing some simple recording and drag and drop, source control is the best way to do that. This today was focused on desktop technology. The same actions, all the principles that Mubin covered are applicable to web. The only difference there is you're focused on the DOM, the document object model, and a web plugin for browsers such as Chrome, Chromium Edge, Firefox will be installed when you go to record on those. Yes, if you were using Selenium WebDriver, it does support Grid. That's really outside of Ranorex. Ranorex will just connect to that Selenium server, so your Grid would be set up outside of that. Don't have any webinars on installing of Ranorex on network systems. However, there is command line installation, so you can push out that MSI. There's documentation out there on our website. If you have questions or need help finding that, please give us an email. Warnings can show up in the report for a number of reasons, like unbound variables. You can turn those warnings off in the report configuration. There may also be warnings for things like actions outside of the bounds. For those, take a look at our general troubleshooting, or again, please contact us. Let's see if we can find another good one in here and we'll wrap up. Conditions, that's actually a very good question here, how we can use conditions. So on that smart folder that Mubin showed, you can also use a condition by looking at data from your data source or by using a get value and passing that to a parameter. This is a way to use the interface to create basically an if else, so you don't need to program with that. Very good. Thank you for your questions. If I did not get to them, we will be addressing those later on. As a final note, you will get a recording of this webinar here after this concludes. And please give us an email at evaluation@Ranorex for any other inquiries. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.